Put your hands where I can see them, Evelyn. Those were the first words the officer said to me on the morning my entire life ended. I was 18 years old, standing outside Westfield High School with a backpack over one shoulder and a half-finished coffee in my hand when the police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. At first, I thought they were there for someone else. Westfield was the kind of small Pennsylvania town where everybody knew everybody, where police officers waved at kids during parades and teachers attended church with your parents every Sunday morning. Nothing truly terrible was supposed to happen there. Especially not to girls like me. I still remember the rain that morning. Thin, cold drops tapping against the hood of the cruiser while students slowed down to stare. Someone near the football field stopped walking entirely. Another student pulled out a phone. My fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup as the officer approached me with a face so serious it made my stomach twist before he even spoke again. "Evelyn Carter?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "You need to come with us." I laughed nervously because surely there had been some mistake. Maybe it was about my brother's old truck registration. Maybe Dad forgot to pay something. Maybe someone had mixed up names. But then another officer stepped out of the cruiser, and I saw the handcuffs hanging from his belt. The coffee slipped from my hand and splashed across the wet pavement. Around me, whispers started spreading through the parking lot like smoke. "What happened? Is that Evelyn? Oh my God!" I searched the crowd desperately for a familiar face, someone who would step forward and say there had been a misunderstanding, but nobody moved. They just stared. Some looked shocked. Others looked curious. A few already looked afraid of me. The officer lowered his voice slightly. "A girl filed a report last night," he said carefully. "We need you to answer some questions downtown." A girl. That was all he said. Just a girl. But somehow those two words were enough to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely hear the rain anymore. "Who?" I whispered. The officers exchanged a quick glance before one of them finally answered. "Madison Reed." I blinked in confusion because I barely knew Madison. She was pretty in the polished, expensive way girls from wealthy families usually were in our town. Blonde hair. Perfect smile. Cheer captain. The kind of girl teachers adored before she even opened her mouth. We had spoken maybe 3 times in our entire lives. Once during sophomore chemistry class. Once at a football game concession stand. And once 2 weeks earlier at a graduation party where she barely looked at me. "There has to be some mistake," I said quickly. "I don't even know her." But the officers had already gone quiet again. One gently took my wrist. The metal clicked around it a second later. I will never forget that sound for as long as I live. Not because it hurt. It didn't. But because of what it did to everyone watching me. In 1 second, I stopped being Evelyn Carter. Honor roll student. Debate team captain. The girl accepted into Temple University with a partial scholarship. Suddenly, I became something else. Something dangerous. Something people stepped away from. Across the parking lot, I saw Mrs. Grayson from the front office covering her mouth with one hand. 2 boys from my English class whispered to each other while staring openly. Someone actually took a step backward when I walked past them. And then I saw my father's truck pulling into the school entrance. For one impossible second, relief flooded through me so hard I nearly cried. Dad would fix this. Dad would explain everything. He climbed out slowly, rain soaking into his brown work jacket almost immediately. His eyes found mine, then dropped to the handcuffs around my wrists. I waited for him to say something. Anything. But he just stood there frozen beside the truck while the rain collected on the brim of his baseball cap. "Dad," I said shakily. "I didn't do anything." He looked exhausted suddenly. Older than 47. Like someone had drained all the life out of him in 10 seconds flat. The officer beside me cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, she'll have a chance to explain downtown." My father still didn't move. Didn't come closer. Didn't tell them they were wrong. He just stared at me with an expression I had never seen before in my life. Fear. Not fear for me. Fear of me. That was the moment I understood something terrible. The accusation itself almost didn't matter anymore. In a town like Westfield, once people saw the handcuffs, they stopped asking questions. The story was already written. And somehow, without even knowing why, I had become the villain in it. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and wet carpet. I remember that more clearly than anything else about that morning. Not the ride downtown. Not the way people stared through the cruiser windows as we passed Main Street. Not even the way my wrists trembled after the handcuffs were removed. What stayed with me was the smell. Sour coffee. Rainwater. Fear. An officer led me into a small interview room with pale gray walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. There was no window. Just a buzzing fluorescent light overhead that made everything look cold and sickly. I sat down slowly, folding my hands together in my lap because I did not know what else to do with them. My backpack had been taken. My phone too. It felt strange sitting there without the small, ordinary things that had belonged to my life only an hour earlier. One of the officers placed a paper cup of water in front of me. I reached for it automatically, then realized my hands were shaking badly enough to make the water ripple. "Someone will speak with you shortly," he said gently before leaving the room. Shortly turned into almost 2 hours. I sat there listening to muffled footsteps outside the door while my thoughts spiraled further and further out of control. Madison Reed. I kept replaying her name in my head, trying to understand how a girl I barely knew had somehow pulled me into something so serious that police officers had shown up at school. Maybe she confused me with somebody else. Maybe someone lied to her. Maybe this would all be cleared up in 10 minutes once people realized there had been some misunderstanding. But deep down, another feeling had already started creeping in. A colder one. Because if this really was a misunderstanding, why had nobody looked surprised? Why had my father stood there saying nothing while they led me away? The door finally opened just before noon. My father walked in first. Then a woman in a navy blue blazer carrying a legal pad. Dad avoided my eyes completely as he sat down across from me. The woman introduced herself as a public defender appointed temporarily until my parents decided how to proceed. That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. Until my parents decided how to proceed. Like there was already something to proceed with. "Dad," I said immediately. "Please tell them I did not do anything." He rubbed both hands over his face slowly before answering. "Evelyn, people are talking." I stared at him in disbelief. "Talking about what?" Neither of them answered right away. The attorney finally cleared her throat softly. "Madison Reed claims something happened after Tyler Benson's graduation party last weekend." My entire body went still. I had gone to that party with 3 friends from debate club. It was crowded, loud, and awkward in the way small-town graduation parties always were. Somebody had rented giant speakers. Half the football team was drinking cheap beer behind the garage. Madison had been there too, surrounded by girls from cheerleading. I remembered seeing her near the pool briefly while grabbing a soda from a cooler. That was it. That was the full extent of our interaction. "I barely even spoke to her," I said quickly. "Dad, you know where I was that night. I came home before midnight." He nodded faintly but still would not look directly at me. The attorney leaned forward carefully. "Evelyn, right now you need to stay calm and answer questions carefully. The accusation has already spread around town." Something about the way she said it made me feel suddenly dizzy. Spread around town. Like gossip. Like a storm moving through the streets while I sat trapped inside this tiny room. "What exactly did she say?" I whispered. Another silence followed. The attorney glanced briefly at my father before speaking. "She claims you threatened her after the party and frightened her badly enough that she reported it." I blinked several times, trying to process the absurdity of it. Threatened her? I had barely spoken 10 words to Madison Reed in my entire life. "That is insane," I said immediately. "Why would she even say that?" Dad finally looked at me then, but there was something different in his face now. Exhaustion. Shame. Fear of becoming part of the scandal himself. "The Reed family is already talking to people," he muttered quietly. "Your principal called me this morning before I even got to school." The attorney carefully slid a folded newspaper across the metal table toward me. It was the local paper. Westfield Gazette. Somebody had rushed out an online article so quickly that there were still spelling errors in the first paragraph. But my name was there in large black letters anyway. Local student questioned after incident involving prominent family. I stared at the headline, while my chest tightened so painfully I could barely breathe. Underneath it was a blurry photograph somebody had taken outside the school parking lot. Me standing in the rain beside the police cruiser. My wrists together in front of me. Students watching in the background. "They posted this already?" I whispered. The attorney nodded slowly. "It spread online within an hour." I felt something inside me crack quietly then. Not panic exactly. Something worse. The realization that even if the truth eventually came out, people would always remember the photograph first. They would remember the police cruiser. The handcuffs. The whispers. Not me. Never me. By the time my father drove me home that evening, the rain had stopped, but the town already felt different. Westfield had always been quiet after sunset. Front porches glowing softly. Neighbors watering flowers. Pickup trucks parked neatly in driveways. It used to feel safe to me. Familiar. That night it felt like every house was watching. Dad kept both hands tight on the steering wheel during the entire drive. The local radio station murmured softly in the background, but neither of us listened to it. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat staring out the window while people moved through their normal routines as if my life had not just collapsed in a single day. At one red light downtown, I noticed two women outside the grocery store looking directly at our truck. One whispered something into the other woman's ear. They both looked away the second I noticed them. That hurt more than open staring would have. Silence always hurts worse in small towns. Silence means people have already decided what they believe. When we finally pulled into our driveway, my mother was standing behind the kitchen window waiting for us. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. I remember thinking she looked frightened too. Not frightened for me. Frightened of what people would say about our family. The moment I stepped inside the house, I smelled burnt meatloaf and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Ordinary smells. Ordinary life continuing around something unbearable. Mom rushed toward me immediately, gripping both my shoulders. "Are you all right?" she whispered. I nodded automatically even though I was not sure what all right even meant anymore. Dad walked past us into the kitchen without saying a word. He opened the refrigerator, stared inside for several seconds, then closed it again without taking anything out. The tension in the room felt so thick it was hard to breathe through it. "Mom," I said carefully, "you know I would never hurt anybody." She looked down instantly. That terrified me more than if she had argued. "Of course," she said too quickly. "Of course you would not." But her voice sounded uncertain. Weak around the edges. Like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. The phone rang before anybody could speak again. Mom jumped slightly at the sound. Dad answered it after the third ring. I watched his face slowly harden while he listened. "No comment," he muttered finally. "She is 18 years old." Then he hung up hard enough to rattle the kitchen wall. "Who was that?" Mom asked quietly. "Reporter from Pittsburgh." He rubbed his forehead with one hand. "Apparently the story is spreading outside town now." I felt suddenly cold all over again. Earlier that morning, my biggest concern had been final exams and whether I could afford textbooks for college in the fall. Now reporters were calling my house. Mom reached for the television remote with trembling fingers. The local evening news was already covering it. My photograph appeared briefly on the screen beside footage of Westfield High School. The anchor spoke carefully, avoiding specifics, but the damage was already done. "An 18-year-old student remains under investigation after allegations involving another local student surfaced over the weekend." Allegations. Investigation. Those words sounded heavy and permanent. Too large for my small living room. Too large for me. Mom muted the television almost immediately, but it was too late. We had all heard it. Dad sat heavily at the kitchen table and stared at the floor. Temple called this afternoon, he said quietly without looking at me. My chest tightened instantly. What? They are reviewing your scholarship status until this situation is resolved. The room went completely silent. I could actually hear the ticking of the clock above the stove. Slow. Sharp. Relentless. I had worked for that scholarship since freshman year. Late nights studying while my friends went to football games. Debate tournaments every Saturday morning. Volunteer hours at the library. Every single thing I had done suddenly felt meaningless. Not erased exactly. Worse than erased. Tainted. Dad, this is insane, I whispered. They cannot just destroy my future because somebody said something. He finally looked at me then, but there was no reassurance in his eyes anymore. Only exhaustion. You do not understand how this looks, Evelyn. I stared at him in disbelief. Looks? My voice cracked slightly for the first time all day. You think this is about appearances? Mom stepped between us immediately. Please, she whispered. Both of you. But I could already feel something shifting inside the house. Earlier that morning, I still believed my family would protect me once the truth came out. Now I was not so sure. Dad stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway. Halfway there, he stopped without turning around. The Reed family has money, he said quietly. Connections too. Then he disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. Mom sank into a kitchen chair looking suddenly smaller than I had ever seen her. I stood there alone in the middle of the room while the muted television continued flashing my photograph across the screen. Outside, headlights moved slowly past our house. Cars that never normally drove down our street at night. People slowing down just enough to look. And somewhere across town, Madison Reed was probably sitting safely inside her beautiful house while the entire world quietly rearranged itself around her version of the story. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise because I had barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph from the newspaper again. The rain dripping from my hair. The police cruiser. The expression on my father's face. For a few confused seconds after waking, I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare. Then I noticed my phone was still missing from my nightstand, and reality settled back over me like cold water. The house was unusually quiet. Dad had already left for work without saying goodbye. Mom sat alone at the kitchen table wearing her pale blue bathrobe, staring into a cup of coffee she had not touched. The television was off for once. I think either of us could bear hearing my name again. You should eat something, she said softly when I walked in. I opened the refrigerator automatically, but my stomach twisted the second I smelled food. I closed it again without taking anything out. Mom watched me carefully for a moment before speaking again. Your Aunt Linda called last night. I leaned against the counter silently. She said people are saying all kinds of things online. There was hesitation in her voice now. Carefulness. Like every word inside this house suddenly needed to be measured. What kinds of things? Mom looked down into her coffee again. That you were obsessed with Madison. That there was some argument at the party. I let out a stunned laugh that sounded nothing like amusement. Obsessed? I barely even know her. But the problem with lies in small towns is that they grow faster than truth. By morning, people were already adding details that had never existed. Imaginary arguments. Imaginary history. Imaginary motives. Everybody wanted the story to make sense, and when reality was too ordinary, they invented something uglier. Around 10 o'clock, I finally convinced Mom to give me my laptop back. Dad had apparently hidden it in their bedroom overnight like I was some kind of criminal who could not be trusted online. The second the screen loaded, I understood why. My social media pages were flooded with messages. Some from classmates pretending to sound concerned while fishing for gossip. Some from strangers calling me disgusting without even knowing what happened. One message simply read, "We always knew something was wrong with you." I stared at that sentence for a long time because it frightened me how quickly people rewrote history. One day earlier, those same people had smiled at me in school hallways. They had copied my homework, sat beside me in chemistry class, laughed at my jokes during lunch. Now suddenly they claimed they had always sensed darkness in me. Human beings do that when they are scared. They rewrite the past so they can pretend disaster was predictable all along. A notification popped up from Temple University while I was still scrolling. My scholarship review had officially become a temporary suspension pending investigation results. I read the email 3 times before the words fully sank in. 4 years of work erased by one accusation. Mom quietly sat down beside me while I stared at the screen. "Maybe this will blow over soon," she whispered. But even she sounded unconvinced now. Around noon, somebody knocked on the front door. Mom jumped so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Through the front window, I saw Mrs. Delaney from next door standing on our porch holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Relief briefly flickered across Mom's face. "That is kind of her," she murmured before opening the door. Mrs. Delaney stepped inside slowly, clutching the dish awkwardly against her chest. She looked at me only briefly before turning toward my mother. "I just wanted you both to know we are praying for your family," she said softly. "Praying for your family. Not praying for me." That distinction mattered more than people realize. Mom thanked her quietly while I stood frozen near the hallway listening. Mrs. Delaney lowered her voice after that, but not enough. "People are saying the Reed family might press further if Evelyn does not cooperate." My mother's face went pale instantly. "Further?" Mrs. Delaney nodded carefully. "Apparently Madison is very upset. Poor thing has been crying nonstop according to church members." Poor thing. I closed my eyes for one brief second because suddenly I understood the true danger of what was happening. Madison had already become the victim in everybody's mind. Beautiful. Fragile. Protected. And the more sympathy she gained, the less human I became. Mrs. Delaney finally left the casserole on the counter before excusing herself awkwardly. The second the door closed, Mom sank into a chair looking exhausted. "Maybe you should stay inside for a few days," she whispered. "Until people calm down." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to hide? I want to protect you." "No," I said quietly. "You want to protect the family." Her eyes filled instantly, but she did not deny it. That hurt worse than anything else so far. Not the police station. Not the newspaper. Not the cruel messages online. My own mother could no longer separate my innocence from the embarrassment surrounding it. Outside, I noticed another car slowing down in front of our house before continuing down the street. The third one that morning. People were curious now. Curious and hungry for scandal. And somewhere across town, Madison Reed was still being comforted while my entire life slowly collapsed room by room inside my own home. 3 days after the accusation, my father stopped calling it a misunderstanding. That was when I realized I was truly alone. I came downstairs that Thursday morning expecting another tense silence at breakfast, but instead I found both my parents sitting at the kitchen table waiting for me. Dad still wore his work uniform even though it was nearly 9 o'clock. Mom looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing her eyes like she had not slept in days. The air inside the kitchen felt heavy and strange. Like a room where somebody had already made a decision before you arrived. Dad folded his hands slowly on the table. "Sit down, Evelyn." My stomach tightened instantly. I lowered myself into the chair across from them while sunlight spilled through the kitchen blinds in thin pale lines across the floor. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally Mom reached for my hand, but her fingers felt cold and uncertain around mine. "Your father met with an attorney yesterday," she said softly. The words hit me harder than I expected. "An attorney?" Dad nodded stiffly. "We needed to understand what we are dealing with." I stared between them in disbelief. "What we are dealing with? I did not do anything." My father let out a slow, tired breath. The problem is that nobody seems willing to believe that right now. Anger flashed through me so suddenly it almost frightened me. So you are giving up? Watch your tone. He snapped automatically, but there was no real force behind it. Just exhaustion. The kind that comes from worrying more about survival than truth. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a typed statement from the attorney. Words like cooperation and resolution appeared over and over again. Carefully chosen language that sounded calm while quietly demanding surrender. The lawyer thinks it would help if you stayed out of public view for a while, Dad said. No social media. No speaking to reporters. No going into town. I looked at him in disbelief. You want me to hide like I actually did something wrong? People already think something happened, he said quietly. Every time they see you, the story grows. I could not believe what I was hearing. My own father was speaking about me like I was some dangerous situation that needed containment. Dad, I whispered, why are you acting like their reputation matters more than mine? His jaw tightened immediately. Because this family has to survive after all this is over. That sentence settled over the kitchen like ice water. This family? Not me. The family. I finally understood then that my parents had started separating me from themselves emotionally. Protecting the Carter name no longer included protecting Evelyn Carter. Mom began crying quietly beside me. Your father is just scared, she whispered. Everybody is talking about us at church. At his job. Everywhere. I pulled my hand away slowly. So this is about embarrassment. Dad stood up abruptly from the table and walked toward the sink. You think this is easy for us? He asked sharply. You think I enjoy walking into work while people stare at me? There it was. Finally. The truth beneath everything else. He was humiliated. Not worried about my pain. Humiliated by proximity to scandal. I suddenly remembered something from childhood. I was maybe 10 years old, sitting beside him in the bleachers during a Little League game, while he explained why people in small towns cared so much about reputation. Out here, he had said back then, people decide who you are long before they know you. At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Now I realized he had spent his entire life afraid of that exact reality. The phone rang again before anybody could continue. Dad answered quickly this time. I watched his expression shift almost immediately. Nervous. Respectful. Careful. Yes, Mr. Reed, he said quietly. My entire body stiffened. Madison's father. Dad listened silently for nearly 2 full minutes while Mom stared at the table with tears running quietly down her face. Finally he muttered, I understand, before hanging up. What did he want? I asked immediately. Dad rubbed his forehead slowly. He says Madison is struggling emotionally after everything. I laughed softly in disbelief. Emotionally? Evelyn, Mom whispered weakly. No, I said sharply. I want to hear this. I want to know how the girl who lied about me is somehow the victim now. Dad turned around slowly then, and for the first time since this nightmare started, genuine anger appeared in his face. You need to stop saying she lied. The room went completely silent. I stared at him, waiting for him to correct himself. He did not. You cannot possibly believe her, I whispered. He looked away immediately, and somehow that was even worse. Because he still did not know what to believe. His own daughter sat in front of him terrified and falling apart, and he still could not fully choose my side over public opinion. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped loudly across the kitchen floor. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly. Not the police. Not the town. Not even Madison. It is sitting here realizing my own father would rather doubt me than upset people with money. Dad flinched like I had slapped him. Mom began crying harder. But nobody denied it. Outside the kitchen window, I noticed another neighbor slowing down while walking her dog past our house. She glanced toward the curtains before quickly looking away. By then, even strangers understood something I had only just begun to accept myself. In Westfield, the truth mattered far less than who had the power to shape the story. By Friday afternoon, I had become invisible in my own town. Not because people stopped looking at me. They looked constantly. But they no longer looked at me like a person. I was something else now. A story. A warning. A scandal people discussed in grocery store aisles while pretending not to stare directly at my family. Mom finally convinced me to leave the house for the first time in days because we needed groceries. Maybe it will help to feel normal for a little while, she said carefully while grabbing her purse. I almost laughed at the word normal. Nothing about my life felt normal anymore. The drive to Miller's Market took less than 10 minutes, but my chest tightened harder with every passing block. I noticed people lowering their voices when our car stopped at intersections. A man outside the gas station openly stared through the windshield before nudging the woman beside him. Even Mom sat stiffer in her seat now, both hands locked tightly around the steering wheel. The second we entered the grocery store, I understood this had been a mistake. Conversations softened almost immediately around us. Not completely silent. Just quieter in that deliberate way people do when they want you to notice they were talking about you seconds earlier. I kept my eyes on the shopping cart while Mom moved nervously through the produce section beside me. Halfway down aisle 4, I heard somebody whisper my name behind me. Then another voice answered softly. "That is her." I reached automatically for a box of cereal just to give my hands something to do. Across the aisle, 2 women around my mother's age stared openly before pretending to compare soup cans when I looked up. "Do not pay attention," Mom whispered quickly. But she sounded embarrassed, not protective. Near the dairy section, I spotted someone familiar approaching from the opposite end of the aisle. Tyler Benson. The same Tyler whose graduation party everyone kept referencing. For one brief second, relief rushed through me. Tyler knew nothing happened. He had been there the entire night surrounded by dozens of people. Surely he could clear this up. "Tyler," I called softly. He froze instantly beside the yogurt cooler. His face changed the second he saw me. Not anger. Worse. Panic. "Hey," he muttered awkwardly while glancing around to see who might be watching. "Can we talk for a second?" I asked quickly. "You know I left your party early." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact completely. "I really do not want to get involved." My stomach dropped. "Involved? Evelyn." He lowered his voice. "People are saying a lot right now. But you know the truth." He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his expression chilled me completely. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of being associated with me publicly. "I just think everybody should let the adults handle it," he mumbled before pushing his cart away almost immediately. I stood there frozen beside the milk refrigerators while cold air spilled against my arms. Mom touched my elbow gently. "Come on," she whispered. But something inside me had already started changing. Up until that moment, part of me still believed facts would matter eventually. That people who knew me would speak up once the initial shock faded. Instead, they were backing away one by one to protect themselves. By the time we reached the checkout lanes, my face burned with humiliation. The teenage cashier would not even look directly at me while scanning our groceries. Her hands moved too quickly, nervous and shaky. Behind us, 2 older men whispered openly enough for me to hear fragments. "Reed family, poor girl, town going downhill. Poor girl. Always Madison. Never me." Outside the store, the summer heat felt heavy and suffocating after the freezing air conditioning inside. Mom loaded grocery bags into the trunk silently while I stood near the shopping carts staring across the parking lot. That was when I noticed Madison's car. White BMW. Perfectly polished. Parked 3 rows away. My heartbeat instantly quickened. She stepped out a moment later wearing oversized sunglasses and a pale pink sweater despite the heat. 2 of her friends walked beside her carrying shopping bags and iced coffees. They were laughing about something. Casual. Relaxed. Like nothing terrible had happened at all. Madison noticed me standing near the cart return almost immediately. The laughter stopped. Her friends went quiet beside her. For one long second, we simply stared at each other across the parking lot. I kept waiting to see guilt in her face. Fear. Anything human. Instead, she slowly removed her sunglasses and looked at me with something far colder. Calculation. Then she leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something that made both girls glance at me quickly before turning away. They climbed into the BMW seconds later and drove off without another look. Mom grabbed my arm gently. "Do not," she whispered immediately, mistaking the expression on my face for anger. But it was not anger anymore. Standing there in that parking lot watching Madison drive away smiling comfortably while my life collapsed around me, I realized something much worse. She was not scared. Not even a little. Which meant she believed nobody would ever question her version of the story. And somehow, deep down, I was beginning to understand why. That night I stopped crying. Up until then, every hour had felt like drowning. Fear. Shame. Confusion. But after seeing Madison in that parking lot smiling like none of this had cost her anything, something inside me hardened quietly. I sat alone on my bedroom floor long after midnight with my old yearbooks spread around me, trying to understand how a stranger had gained the power to erase my entire future in less than a week. My room still looked exactly like it had before everything changed. College brochures stacked beside my desk. Graduation. Cards taped to the mirror. A half-packed suitcase in the corner waiting for Temple University in the fall. Looking at those things now felt like staring into somebody else's life. Around 1 a.m, I heard my parents arguing downstairs. Their voices were muffled through the floorboards, but certain words drifted upward clearly enough. Lawyer. Settlement. Protecting the family. I sat perfectly still on the carpet listening while the house creaked softly around me. Then I heard my father say something that made my chest go cold. "Maybe if she apologizes privately, this whole thing can calm down." I covered my mouth instantly because the sound that escaped me did not even feel human. My own father wanted me to apologize for something I did not do simply because he hoped it would make life easier again. Mom argued softly after that, but not strongly enough. Not with certainty. More like somebody trying to preserve peace instead of truth. That was the moment I finally understood the real danger of fear. Fear makes ordinary people betray you slowly while convincing themselves they are being practical. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of new notifications online. Somebody had leaked my school disciplinary file from sophomore year after I got detention for skipping gym class. Another account reposted old photographs from parties with captions implying I had always been unstable. None of it made sense logically, but logic no longer mattered. People were collecting random fragments of my life and reshaping them into evidence for a version of me that had never existed. By lunchtime, even my younger cousin Haley unfollowed me online. Haley. The little girl who used to beg me to braid her hair during family cookouts. I stared at her name disappearing from my friend list and suddenly realized this thing was spreading faster than anybody could stop it. I closed the laptop and sat silently at the kitchen table, while sunlight moved slowly across the floor. Mom hovered nearby nervously, pretending to clean dishes that were already clean. Finally she spoke without turning around. "Your father spoke with the church pastor this morning." I laughed softly under my breath. "Of course he did. He is trying to help." "No," I said quietly. "He is trying to survive this." Mom finally turned toward me then, tears already gathering in her eyes. "You do not understand how scared he is." "I understand perfectly." My voice stayed calm somehow. That frightened even me. "He is scared of losing respect in town. He is scared of gossip. He is scared of the Reeds. But nobody in this house seems scared for me anymore." Mom opened her mouth to argue, then stopped because deep down she knew I was right. Later that afternoon, another unexpected thing happened. Somebody slipped an envelope into our mailbox without postage or a return address. Mom found it first and carried it into the kitchen carefully like it might explode. My name was written across the front in black ink. Just Evelyn. Nothing else. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of notebook paper. No signature. No explanation. Just one sentence written in messy handwriting. You are not the only one she lied about. I stared at the words so long they almost stopped looking real. Mom stepped closer beside me. What does it mean? She whispered. I read the sentence again carefully. Not the only one. Which meant there had been others. My pulse started pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. For the first time since this nightmare began, the story around me shifted slightly. Tiny. Fragile. But enough to matter. Mom, I whispered slowly. What if this is not really about me? She frowned in confusion. What do you mean? I looked back down at the paper. Madison's face in the parking lot flashed through my mind again. Calm. Confident. Completely unafraid. Suddenly I realized something that had never occurred to me before. Innocent people panic when the truth is questioned. Madison never had. Not once. Which meant she was protecting something bigger than the accusation itself. Outside, thunder rumbled softly in the distance as another summer storm rolled toward town. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket while a strange new feeling settled quietly beneath all the fear inside me. Not hope exactly. Something colder. The beginning of suspicion. The note stayed hidden inside my dresser drawer for 2 days before I finally told anyone else about it. Not because I was afraid. Because I had learned fear was contagious in this town, and I no longer trusted people to react with honesty. Even inside my own house, every conversation felt fragile now. My father barely looked at me anymore unless absolutely necessary. Mom floated nervously between us, trying to smooth over silences that could no longer be repaired. The worst part was how normal everything outside our disaster still looked. Lawns still got mowed. Church bells still rang every Sunday morning. Kids still rode bicycles down Maple Street while my entire future quietly rotted behind closed doors. By Monday afternoon, the local rumor mill had evolved again. Somebody online claimed there were witnesses from Tyler Benson's party willing to support Madison's story. Another account insisted the police were preparing formal charges soon. None of it was confirmed, but facts no longer mattered in Westfield. Repetition became truth faster than evidence ever could. I spent most of that day sitting in my bedroom rereading the anonymous note over and over again. You are not the only one she lied about. Every time I looked at those words, my stomach tightened differently. Less panic now. More focus. Because if somebody risked sneaking that message into our mailbox, it meant at least one person inside this town knew something they were afraid to say publicly. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. Unknown number. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering cautiously. Hello? Silence. Then a nervous female voice barely above a whisper. Do not hang up. I sat upright instantly on the edge of my bed. Who is this? Another pause. You do not know me very well, the voice said quietly. But I graduated with Madison last year. My pulse quickened immediately. What do you want? I saw what happened to you online. Her voice trembled slightly now. And I think you deserve to know something. I stood and quietly shut my bedroom door before speaking again. Who are you? My name is Claire Donovan. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Student council maybe. Volleyball team. One of the many faces that drifted through high school hallways without really intersecting with mine. Why are you calling me? Claire hesitated long enough that I almost thought she disconnected. Because Madison has done this before. The room went completely still around me. What? Not exactly the same, Claire whispered quickly. But she lies when she feels cornered. Especially when boys are involved. Or parties. Or reputation. My heart started pounding harder with every word. Why would she target me? I barely know her. That is the part one do not understand, Claire admitted softly. But something happened at Tyler's party that night. Something people are not talking about publicly. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. What happened? Another silence followed. Longer this time. Fearful. I cannot say over the phone. Claire, my entire life is falling apart. My voice cracked despite myself. Please. She lowered her voice even further. Madison disappeared upstairs for almost an hour during the party with somebody she was not supposed to be with. I froze instantly. Who? I do not know for sure, Claire whispered quickly. But afterward she came downstairs crying. Then her father showed up not long later. My mind started racing violently. What does that have to do with me? I think they needed somebody else to focus on. The words settled into my chest slowly like poison. Downstairs, I could hear my mother unloading dishes in the kitchen while my entire understanding of the situation shifted again. Claire, I whispered carefully. Why are you telling me this now? She let out a shaky breath. Because what they are doing to you is wrong. Then her tone changed suddenly. Sharper. Nervous. Listen to me carefully. Madison's father controls half this town. His company sponsors school programs, church fundraisers, everything. People protect that family because they are scared of losing things. I thought about my father's terrified expression over the past week. The pastor. The lawyer. Tyler refusing to speak publicly. Suddenly all of it started fitting together differently. You need proof, Claire continued softly. Otherwise nobody will stand beside you. Do you have proof? Silence again. Then quietly. No. But somebody else might. Before I could ask another question, she spoke quickly one last time. Check who left Tyler's party early that night besides you. Then the call disconnected completely. I stood motionless in my bedroom staring at the dark phone screen while thunder rolled softly outside again. For the first time since this nightmare began, the accusation itself no longer felt random. It felt strategic. Planned. Like I had been selected because I was ordinary enough to sacrifice without resistance. Downstairs, I heard my father come home from work and toss his keys heavily onto the kitchen counter. His exhausted voice drifted faintly through the floorboards while my mother asked how his day went. Same conversations. Same fear. Same collapsing family. But upstairs in my bedroom, something inside me had changed permanently. Until now, I had spent every day trying to convince people I was innocent. Suddenly I realized that was the wrong question entirely. The real question was what Madison Reed had been so desperate to hide that destroying my life became worth it. The next morning, I did something nobody expected me to do. I left the house alone. Mom noticed me grabbing my car keys near the front door and immediately looked alarmed. Where are you going? She asked softly. I slipped the anonymous note into my jacket pocket before answering. Out. Her face tightened with worry. Evelyn, please do not make things worse right now. Worse. That word again. Everything had become about avoiding embarrassment, avoiding gossip, avoiding conflict. Nobody seemed interested in confronting the truth itself. I looked at my mother standing there in her faded robe, exhausted from days of fear and humiliation, and suddenly I felt sorry for her. She had spent her entire life trying to keep peace inside a town built on appearances. I am not doing anything wrong, I said quietly before walking outside. The morning air smelled like wet pavement after another overnight storm. Clouds still hung low above Westfield while people moved through their routines, pretending normal life still existed here. I drove slowly toward Tyler Benson's neighborhood with Claire Donovan's words repeating inside my head. Check who left the party early besides you. Tyler lived on the richer side of town where driveways curved longer and lawns looked professionally trimmed. I parked half a block away because suddenly I did not trust anybody enough to be seen arriving. As I walked toward the house, I noticed several empty beer cans still sitting near the edge of the driveway from the graduation party days earlier. Tiny leftovers from the night that ruined my life. Tyler answered the door, looking startled the second he saw me standing there. Evelyn? His voice dropped instantly. What are you doing here? I need to ask you something. He glanced nervously over his shoulder before stepping outside and pulling the front door mostly shut behind him. Even now, He did not want me inside his house where neighbors might notice. "This is not a good idea," he muttered quickly. "Just answer one question." I kept my voice calm despite the pounding in my chest. "Who left your party early that night besides me?" Tyler's expression changed immediately. Small. Quick. But enough. Fear again. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." He rubbed the back of his neck anxiously while looking toward the street. "People are already talking too much, Evelyn. Then let them talk about the truth for once." For several long seconds neither of us spoke. Finally Tyler sighed heavily. "Madison left around midnight." My pulse quickened instantly. "Alone?" Another hesitation. "No, who was with her?" Tyler looked physically uncomfortable now. Like somebody trapped between guilt and self-preservation. "I should not be telling you this, Tyler." He lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "Coach Brennan's son." Everything inside me went still. Ethan Brennan. 22 years old. Former football star. Son of Westfield High's beloved football coach and assistant athletic director. The Brennans were practically royalty in town right beside the Reed family. Suddenly Claire's warning made terrifying sense. "You are sure?" Tyler nodded. Reluctantly. "They disappeared upstairs for a while. People noticed." My mind raced violently. Madison crying afterward. Her father arriving unexpectedly. The immediate accusation against me the next morning. It all connected now with horrifying clarity. "Why would they target me?" I whispered mostly to myself. Tyler finally looked directly at me then, guilt written plainly across his face. "Because you were easy." The words hit harder than any insult could have. Easy. Ordinary family. No powerful connections. No wealthy father funding school programs. No influence. Just me. Tyler swallowed hard before continuing. "People started talking at the party after Madison came downstairs upset. Somebody said they saw you arguing near the kitchen earlier that night." "We were not arguing." "I know." His voice dropped further. "But once Mr. Reed showed up, everything shifted fast." I stared at him silently while the entire town suddenly revealed itself differently in my mind. Not as confused people searching for truth. As frightened people protecting power. Tyler looked miserable now. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I should have said something earlier." "Why did you not?" He laughed bitterly under his breath. "Because my father owns a hardware store that depends on Coach Brennan's construction contracts." There it was again. Fear. Everybody in Westfield belonged to somebody richer, somebody stronger, somebody more important. And every one of them had decided sacrificing me was easier than challenging the families who controlled the town. A car turned slowly onto the street then, and Tyler immediately stiffened. "You should go," he muttered nervously. "If somebody sees you here." I almost laughed at how pathetic it all sounded now. The secrecy. The whispering. The cowardice. I stepped backward off the porch slowly. "Thank you for finally telling me the truth." Tyler looked down at the ground. "Be careful, Evelyn." But as I walked back toward my car, I realized something strange. For the first time since the handcuffs closed around my wrists outside Westfield High, I was no longer afraid. Hurt, yes. Furious, absolutely. But fear had finally burned away completely. Because now I understood what really happened that night. Madison Reed did not accuse me because I frightened her. She accused me because powerful families needed somebody expendable to absorb the scandal before it touched their perfect children. And the most terrifying part was realizing how close they had come to getting away with it forever.